Imagine working all night to serve people who look down on you, only to be humiliated in front of everyone by the most powerful man in the room. But what if, in that very moment of shame, the truth comes out, and the man who mocked you suddenly finds his entire world collapsing? Tonight, you'll hear the unforgettable story of Amara, a young waitress who carried the weight of her brother's future, and how one cruel insult changed everything forever. The night was golden in New York City. Inside the Grand Marlowe Hotel, crystal chandeliers glowed like captured stars, soft jazz floated in the air, and the city's most powerful men and women whispered fortunes into existence over glasses of wine. To most, it was a place of untouchable wealth. But to Amara Johnson it was just another shift. Dressed in her black and white uniform, hair pulled neatly back, she moved from table to table with the quiet rhythm of someone who knew how to disappear in plain sight. She smiled when needed, spoke when spoken to, and kept her eyes lowered, not out of fear but out of choice. Because people underestimate the ones who blend in. And Amara had learned a long time ago that invisibility could be a kind of armor. But Amara was not just a waitress. At 26, she had already lived through storms most people couldn't survive. Her mother had died when she was still in high school. Her father had never been in the picture. And with no one else left, she became both sister and mother to her 10-year-old brother Caleb. Caleb was her heart. Born with cerebral palsy, he couldn't run or climb like other kids, but his smile could brighten the darkest room. Every extra shift Amara worked, every dream she put on pause was for him. She had once been a track star in college, with scholarships and coaches whispering about Olympic potential. But when the bills came and the rent notice stuck to their door, dreams had to wait. Amara traded medals for double shifts, classrooms for late nights, and applause for silence. Still, she never complained. She believed in working hard, in protecting her brother, and in carrying her burdens with quiet strength. That night at the Marlowe wasn't just another fancy dinner. It was the dinner, the kind that decided the future of billions. The guest of honor was Richard Hale, a 70-year-old billionaire investor known for his sharp mind and sharper morals. Everyone wanted his attention. And sitting across from him at the main table was Victor Cole, the 38-year-old CEO of Coltech Industries. Victor was a man who thought the world belonged to him. Ruthless, arrogant, and obsessed with power. He had turned his college startup into a multibillion-dollar empire. But where others saw brilliance, those who worked under him saw fear. To Victor, people weren't human beings, they were tools. Useful only when they obeyed. And tonight, he needed Richard Hale to believe he was the kind of man worth trusting with a $3.5 billion deal. Victor Cole was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. Amara carried a tray of crystal glasses toward the main table. She had done this 1,000 times. Breathe steady. Walk smooth. Serve quietly. That was the rule. She placed a glass in front of Richard Hale, then leaned slightly to pour wine into Victor's glass. Her hand was steady, but fate had other plans. The glass tipped, just slightly. A ribbon of deep red Bordeaux spilled onto the white linen tablecloth, creeping toward the sleeve of Victor Cole's $1,000 suit. A few drops touched his cuff. The entire table froze. "I'm so sorry, sir," Amara said softly, already reaching for a napkin. Her movements were careful, precise, respectful. But Victor Cole didn't see service. He saw insult. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. And in a voice low but sharp enough to cut the air, he hissed, "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." The words sliced through the room. The music faltered. Forks hovered in the air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Guests turned their heads. Phones tilted upward, recording. Amara stood perfectly still, napkin still in her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't even blink. She had been overlooked her whole life, but this was different. This wasn't whispered cruelty in a back alley. This was humiliation, public and deliberate. Her silence was louder than any reply. Across the table, Richard Hale lowered his fork. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes moved slowly to Victor Cole, And in that heavy silence, something shifted. Victor didn't notice. He dabbed at his cuff, annoyed, muttering something under his breath. One of his junior executives gave a nervous laugh, trying to lighten the moment, but it only made the air heavier. Amara straightened her posture. She placed the napkin gently on the edge of the table. Then, with a calm voice that carried just enough weight, she said, "Please enjoy your meal." And she walked away. To the guests it looked like nothing. But to Richard Hale it was everything. He had seen arrogance before, plenty of it. But he had also seen dignity, the kind that shines brightest when someone is being stepped on. And in Amara's quiet strength, he recognized something rare, something powerful. The rest of the room tried to recover. The band started playing again, conversations resumed, and waiters moved with forced cheer. But no one forgot what they had just witnessed. A man who wanted billions had revealed his true nature. And a young woman the world ignored had revealed hers. Amara slipped into the service hallway, her heart pounding. She leaned against the wall for just a moment, steadying her breath. She had been called names before, treated like she was invisible before. But something about tonight felt different. She thought of Caleb, of the promise she made to him when their mother died, that she would never let the world break them, that no matter what, they would rise. And as she straightened her shoulders and returned to the dining room, Amara knew something deep inside. Victor Cole thought he had silenced her. But he had only awakened her. Because storms don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they come with silence. And tonight, in the heart of New York's glittering elite, a storm had just begun. The Grand Marlowe's ballroom glowed brighter as the night went on. But inside, something had shifted. The guests forced laughter, glasses clinked, and plates of roasted duck were served. But beneath the surface, tension pulsed like a hidden drumbeat. At table 1, Victor Cole leaned back in his chair, talking louder than usual, trying to brush away the awkward silence that still clung to the room. He cracked a joke, threw out numbers about his company's profits, even snapped his fingers for another glass of wine. But no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't erase the sting of what everyone had just heard. Amara Johnson, the young waitress he had called a stupid black girl, moved quietly around the table again. Her posture was steady, her face calm, but her heart thudded against her chest. She wasn't shaken. No, she refused to give him that satisfaction. But she was watchful. Every eye in the room seemed to follow her now, even when they pretended not to. And one pair of eyes, sharper than all the rest, never left her. Richard Hale. He hadn't said a word since the incident. He didn't raise his voice, didn't slam the table, didn't come to her rescue. That wasn't his way. Instead, he observed. Every twitch of Victor's mouth. Every forced laugh from his executives. And most importantly, every quiet ounce of grace Amara carried as she continued her work. Victor Cole thought silence was power. Richard Hale knew silence could also be judgment. It happened during the next course. Amara returned with a pitcher of water, her hands steady, her eyes focused. She poured for the guests in sequence, one by one, her rhythm flawless. Then she reached Victor. As the water tilted toward his glass, his hand shot out. He gripped her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to send a message. "You wait until I finish speaking," he hissed, his voice low, his breath heavy with wine. "When real business is happening, you don't interrupt. You stand still like the help is supposed to." A ripple moved through the table. The others didn't gasp, but their eyes flicked toward the scene. Esa. They noticed. And they remembered. Amara's eyes met Victor's. Controlled. She didn't yank her wrist away. She didn't flinch. Instead, she said, clear enough for the nearby guests to hear, "Yes, sir. I understand completely." Then gently, she pulled her wrist free and stepped back. Victor blinked, surprised, almost disappointed. He thrived on fear, on trembling reactions, on people shrinking beneath him. But Amara gave him none of it. She simply moved to the next guest, pouring water as though nothing had happened. Her dignity was unshaken, her silence louder than any protest. Richard Hale placed his silverware down again. Slowly, deliberately. He leaned toward his assistant and murmured 2 words in a language few in the room understood. "It's time." The assistant nodded and slipped quietly out of the ballroom. Minutes later, while Victor droned on about market dominance and innovation, a side door opened. A hotel staff member wheeled in a boy, his legs supported by braces, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. His face lit up the moment he saw Amara. "Amara," he called, his voice bright. It was Caleb, her brother. She froze for a split second, her heart leaping into her throat. He wasn't supposed to be here. She had arranged for a neighbor to watch him tonight. But Caleb had begged to see where she worked, and apparently, the staff at the hotel lobby had taken pity on his wide smile. Amara rushed to his side. She crouched down, tucking a curl behind his ear, whispering, "What are you doing here, Caleb? You were supposed to be at home." "I wanted to see you," he said simply, his eyes shining with innocence. "I wanted to see the place where the rich people eat." A few guests chuckled softly at his honesty. Others smiled. But Victor Cole leaned forward, his lip curling. "Of course," he sneered loudly enough for the table to hear. "The help brings family to work. Figures." Amara's jaw tightened. She said nothing. But Richard Hale's eyes sharpened like steel. Victor wasn't finished. He waved his hand dismissively. "Get him out of here. This is no place for cripples." The words slammed into the room like a gunshot. Several guests gasped audibly this time. Phones rose higher, recording openly now. Amara's chest burned, but she steadied herself. She placed a protective hand on Caleb's shoulder, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Don't listen." Caleb looked up at her, confused. But Amara's calm face steadied him. She stood tall, shielding him with her body, her silence once again her shield. Richard Hale stood. The entire ballroom seemed to tilt when Richard rose from his seat. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The string quartet's bow hovered in midair. Even Victor's voice finally faltered. Richard didn't speak immediately. He let the silence thicken, his presence alone commanding attention. Then, in a voice calm but firm, he said, "Mr. Cole, before we move forward with any numbers tonight, there is someone very important you need to meet properly." Victor forced a smile, eager to recover. "Of course. One of your vice presidents. Your lawyer." Richard didn't answer him directly. Instead, he raised one hand and gestured toward Amara. "Her." The crowd turned. Amara froze, her hand still on Caleb's shoulder. "This," Richard continued, stepping forward, "is Amara Johnson. She is not just a waitress. She is my daughter." The room gasped. Phones tilted higher. A ripple of whispers spread like wildfire. Richard placed a hand gently on Amara's shoulder. "I adopted her when she was 7 years old. She chose to keep her birth name. But make no mistake, she is my child. And tonight, she has shown more strength and dignity than most CEOs I've ever met." Victor's smile collapsed. His eyes darted around, searching for a lifeline, but there was none. Richard turned to the rest of the room. "Amara has been working here by choice. She wanted to understand how people in power treat those they believe are beneath them. Tonight, you all witnessed exactly that." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Guests shifted in their seats, some nodding, others murmuring. The truth was undeniable. Richard's gaze locked on Victor. "The girl you called stupid is wiser than you will ever be. The boy you dismissed is braver than most men I know. And the company you run, Mr. Cole, will not be receiving my investment." The room erupted. Chairs scraped back. Conversations ignited. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts even before dessert was served. Victor Cole had just lost everything. And Amara Johnson, the invisible waitress, had just become the headline. The ballroom of the Grand Marlowe was no longer a place of celebration. The air buzzed with tension, and the glittering chandeliers felt more like spotlights exposing hidden truths. What had begun as a dinner meant to secure millions for Victor Cole's company had turned into a public trial, and he was the man at the center of it. Amara stood quietly by her brother, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. She hadn't planned for any of this. She had only wanted to get through her shift, make enough tips to cover Caleb's school fees, and return home to their tiny apartment. Yet here she was, her truth laid bare before a room of power brokers, reporters, and strangers. And the man who had spent the evening mocking her now looked like a drowning ship captain, searching desperately for land. Victor forced a laugh. "Richard, this is a misunderstanding. Performance, perhaps. Surely you're joking. You don't expect me to believe that this waitress, this girl, is really your daughter." The words dripped with desperation, but no one laughed with him. Phones continued recording. Executives whispered among themselves. Some even scooted their chairs further from him, as though his downfall were contagious. Richard Hale's voice cut through the noise, steady as steel. "She doesn't need you to believe it, Victor. The truth stands whether you accept it or not." The silence that followed felt like judgment itself. Victor's mask slipped further. Sweat gathered on his forehead. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wineglass, only to find it empty. He lifted it high, shaking it slightly at a nearby waiter. "Wine," he barked. "Now!" But the waiter didn't move. None of them did. Their loyalty wasn't to Victor anymore. Guests began to shift, conversations rising louder. A woman in a red dress leaned toward her husband and whispered just loud enough for others to hear. "Imagine how many others he's humiliated when the cameras weren't rolling." A man in a gray suit added, "I don't care how big his company is. No investor will touch him after tonight." Victor heard them. Every word. His jaw tightened, but he still tried to salvage what little power he had left. He rose to his feet, straightening his tie, forcing his signature smirk. "Listen," he began, raising his voice. "We all know how these things work. Richard Hale is trying to make a point, but business is business. My company is still the best opportunity in this room. And if you all have any sense, you'll remember that." But no one applauded. No one nodded. Instead, more guests pulled out their phones, typing furiously, posting updates that would spread across the city within minutes. Victor's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing in real time. Amara hadn't spoken since Richard's revelation. She had stood silent, letting the weight of truth settle. But now, as she looked around the room, the judgmental stares, the pitying glances, the silent support from strangers, she felt a wave of courage rise within her. She took one step forward, her voice calm but steady. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she began. "I came here to work, to earn an honest living, to feed my brother, to prove to him that no matter how the world sees us, dignity is something no one can take away." The room quieted instantly. Every head turned toward her. "I've carried trays, scrubbed floors, smiled when people shouted in my face," Amara continued, her voice trembling now, not from fear but from emotion. "And I thought that was enough. But tonight I learned something. Silence protects you only for so long. Eventually you have to speak. You have to show people that your worth doesn't come from money or status, or the seat you hold at the table. It comes from who you are when no one's watching." A hush fell over the ballroom. Even Caleb gazed up at her with wide eyes, pride blooming on his small face. Amara turned to Victor, her gaze steady. "And as for you, you can insult me all you want. But calling my brother what you did, that's something you'll never wash off. It shows the world exactly who you are." Victor's face turned red, his jaw tightening. For the first time all night he had no words. The press wasted no time. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled, and social feeds exploded with headlines. "CEO exposed in racist outburst during investor dinner. Victor Cole humiliates waitress. Turns out she's Richard Hale's daughter. Business tycoon's career over in one night." By morning, every network would carry the story. By next week, investors would withdraw, board members would resign, and regulators would start circling. Victor Cole's empire, built on arrogance and intimidation, had fallen in a single evening. He stormed toward the exit, his steps heavy, his shoulders hunched. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. It was. Richard turned back to Amara. His expression, usually unreadable, softened as he reached out and cupped her cheek. "You didn't need me to defend you tonight," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You defended yourself better than I ever could. I am proud of you, Amara." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. For years, she had questioned whether she truly belonged in Richard's world, whether people would ever see her as more than the adopted girl. Tonight she had her answer, not from him but from herself. She bent down and hugged Caleb, whispering, "We did it, little one. We finally did it." The boy grinned, his eyes shining. "Does this mean we don't have to worry about rent anymore?" Amara laughed through her tears. "Yes, baby. No more worrying about rent." In the weeks that followed, Victor Cole's company collapsed under the weight of scandal. His name disappeared from invitations, his face vanished from billboards, and his arrogance no longer commanded rooms. But Amara's life transformed. She left behind the waitress apron, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she had stepped into something bigger. Richard announced her as his official successor, not in business alone, but in vision. Together, they launched initiatives to provide scholarships, fund hospitals, and create opportunities for children like Caleb, children the world too often overlooked. And everywhere Amara went, people remembered her not as a waitress, not even as Richard Hale's daughter, but as the young woman who stood tall in the face of cruelty and taught a room full of powerful men what real dignity looked like. Closing scene. On a quiet evening months later, Amara stood on the balcony of her new home, Caleb beside her, gazing at the city lights. "Do you ever think about that night?" Caleb asked softly. Amara smiled faintly. "Every day. Not because of what he said but because of what I learned." "What's that?" Caleb tilted his head. "That sometimes," she said, wrapping an arm around him, "the world tries to write your story for you. But only you decide how it ends." Caleb leaned against her, and together they watched the lights flicker like stars against the dark. The storm had passed. The battle was won. And their story, Amara's story, was only just beginning.